My name is Gil Seinfeld, and I've been on the faculty since 2005. I come from New York. I lived up and down the East Coast and moved here in 2005 with my wife and one son, and now we have two more. I taught civil procedure, and I taught a seminar called The Law of American Federalism. Civil procedure is essentially a course about how to get by in civil litigation in the United States. We teach the students what are the major stages of a case, starting from the complaint and then going all the way to the entry of judgment and ultimately appeal. We focus on lots of federal rules of civil procedure. There's a whole body of rules that have been enacted that govern how you behave inside the courtroom, how you file motions and how you file pleadings, how discovery works. And then there's a whole component of the course that's actually about jurisdiction. What sorts of cases and what sorts of parties are properly before a court? So the class is kind of divided into two parts. One is really focused on this body of rules, and one is focused on the law of jurisdiction. So to some extent, I resent the question. The premise is that civil procedure is not intrinsically fun. But for the most part, I understand where it's coming from. Most people come to law school because they want to talk about the hot socio-political legal issues of the day. No one comes to law school saying, I really want to learn the technical rules of jurisdiction and procedure. So I understand why plenty of students and people feel like this is something that might need to be spruced up a bit. I think part of the way that I do that is it's rooted in the fact that I just love teaching. I mean, I could be teaching the phone book, and I think I might have fun doing it. My father-in-law is actually a research neuroscientist, and he lectures all over the world. And when I started this gig, he said to me, Gil, clarity and enthusiasm sell. And I think I bring a fair amount of enthusiasm to the exercise of teaching. I think my students can see that I am having fun when I'm in the classroom, that I feel really engaged with the material when I'm in the classroom, and I hope that that rubs off on them. And then I also happen to, and this might be a little idiosyncratic about me, I happen to find the rules that are at issue in civil procedure super interesting. Courts that are deciding these sorts of questions of procedure and jurisdiction, and the entities that are creating them, they're always trying to balance the interests in fairness to the parties before the court and efficiency, right? You can't have a litigation system that's just going to go on forever. And balancing those things is challenging. And so I find those sorts of questions super interesting. And it also requires students to think strategically about what's going to work well for their clients. So you have to kind of keep a lot of different balls in the air. And I find it interesting, and I hope my students do too. There's something I say about this that it's really hard to do three things at the same time: to correct confusion when it arises in the classroom, to keep the discussion moving at a reasonable pace, and to not embarrass the student who is confused. I can do any two of those things at the same time pretty easily, and doing all three of them is quite hard. I think one of the things I do that works really well is I try to create a culture in which everybody understands that we are all here to learn, that I do not expect my students to have read the material the night before and to come into class being experts in it. It's why they pay me, to help my students understand what is not readily understandable from simply reading the material. Otherwise, we wouldn't need law professors. We'd give our students books and have them go take the bar exam afterward. And so I try to create an environment in which it's okay not to know, in which it's okay to be wrong, in which it's okay to fail. I signal to my students that I do those things all the time. And I think it creates an environment where people feel comfortable asking questions. It's the absolute most important thing I tell my students you can do in my classroom. I actually tell every class I teach, every lecture class I teach, I say on the first day, some students feel an attraction to trying to ask an especially in-depth or novel question that reflects some sort of insight, and that's wonderful sometimes. But I tell my students that the single best question you can ask in my class is, could you say that again, only better this time? And students actually say that to me. And so I think creating a culture in which students feel really comfortable asking questions is one in which people feel like no one is going to be left behind, and class moves along actually quite well, in part because students will ask those questions relatively early, as soon as they spot confusion. They're not shy about asking, so you haven't gone all this way and then have to go back. So it makes it easier when you create that kind of culture in the classroom. It's actually somewhat easier to keep things moving along. I'd say the most important things for someone who's just getting started in law school are to be prepared to think hard, to work hard, and to ask questions. I can't say that enough times. This is not material that people can be expected to read at first cut and come away with anywhere near all of what you might want to come away from it with. And so you have to be willing to ask questions of your peers and of your teacher when they occur to you. I think a lot of times students are a little bit gun shy about asking questions because they don't want to reveal to everyone that they don't understand this or that. They assume that everyone else gets it. So first of all, I can tell you, I still have that experience. I'll be in the faculty lounge at a workshop and someone is presenting a paper and I'm a little bit uncertain about something but don't quite want to ask a question because I worry that everyone else gets it. And this is a bad instinct, and it's something that I try to let go of for me, and I hope my students let go of in the classroom. In all of your classes, you are going to encounter things that are just not intuitive or difficult for you. And I always tell my students, if there is something that you do not understand, chances are very high that somewhere between 10 and 100% of your classmates don't get it quite either. And so learning to be comfortable with your own limitations, with not understanding, and with sharing your sense of what you don't know with your classmates is super important to succeeding in law school, because it's just not something where everything is just poof, going to come to you all on its own. Well, I was one of those people that everyone kind of assumed would be a lawyer from the time I was 10. I was a precocious, talky Jewish kid from New York. Like, that's what we do. At least some of us, I suppose. So, I mean, I don't have any lawyers in my family, really, but I was always interested in American government, and I took an undergraduate course, a couple of law-related undergraduate courses, and I liked what it made my brain do. And so those two things were sufficient to get. I should also say, I was always told I had good communication skills. I was a good writer and good at communicating orally. So in addition to being interested in American government, I had this skill set that seemed like it would play well in law school, and that definitely contributed to my deciding to go to law school. Well, I think there's two answers to that question. So partly there's the question, what was it like to clerk on the Supreme Court? And then there's the question, what was it like to clerk for Justice Scalia in particular? So clerking on the Supreme Court was, though extremely demanding and challenging, in most every respect, deeply wonderful. I felt proud. I felt like I was doing something important. And I also I remember vividly when my parents came to visit me while I was working there, I got to take them on a behind-the-scenes tour, and the justice wasn't in. I took them into Justice Scalia's office, and there was a portrait of George Washington on the wall. Like, George Washington actually sat in front of someone for that portrait, and I remember my mom looked at it. And then she looked at me and she said, "Gil, your father was born in a refugee camp." And she was obviously moved by some kind of American dream sort of story that I don't know that had occurred to me so much while I was there, but it does capture some sense of, I'm doing something that is really exciting and important, and there is this element of how did I end up here? So I think clerking on the Supreme Court felt good in those ways, just felt really good to be achieving something and getting to do something that was interesting. Clerking for Justice Scalia is a somewhat different question, most notably because it would be hard for two people to see the world more differently from the way he and I saw the world. We're in really quite different places ideologically. And that was a mix of good and bad. Part of what was good is that he was consistently excellent to me. He was a really wonderful boss. He treated me with respect. He made me feel like I belonged and that he was happy to have me there, and he really enjoyed mixing it up with me intellectually. He had me there so that I would argue with him, and he clearly liked it. And so I think we kind of just connected interpersonally in a way that was great, and he treated me really well. There were other ways in which it was more challenging. My co-clerks all were more in this, kind of conventional Scalia camp ideologically, and my relationships with them were more challenging in many ways. And then there's also there were some really hot button cases, as there always are, including the affirmative action cases involving this law school. And because I see the world so differently from the way Justice Scalia saw it, there were moments of real discomfort and not being thrilled to be working in a chambers that was pumping out the content that chambers was. And so it was a mix of interpersonally wonderful with the justice, but a little bit stomach churning at times for me. The thing I love most is definitely the sense of community. I think you can go to a lot of law schools and get a superb education, and for a faculty member be surrounded by wonderful colleagues, smart colleagues, but there's an ethic of community here that I think is pretty distinctive. I think that it defines the relationships among faculty members, among students, and between faculty and students. There's just kind of a sense of we're doing this thing together, and it infuses lots of what we do here, and it's the thing I like most.